She was born in prison, and she also grew up behind its walls. Unbelievably, surviving in such a dark and damp environment, she still grew into a radiant angel. The girl's name is Amy, and her mother died from severe bleeding after giving birth to her. Her father, after a failed investment in his youth, fell into massive debt he could not repay, and has been imprisoned in the Marshalsea prison for 20 years. In that era, any debtor unable to repay their debts would have their entire family confined there until the last penny was paid off. Amy's father, Mr. Dorrit, has never been willing to admit his failure. Inside the prison, he clings to life through a fragile illusion of dignity. Amy is his youngest daughter. She is frail and pale, always lowering her head as she quietly does housework and attends to her father. At the same time, she is the only financial support of this decaying family. To help with expenses, 21-year-old Amy secretly works as a maid for a strict and wealthy old lady without telling her family. She crosses the bridge that connects the prison to the outside world, with one end bound by confinement and poverty, and the other by so-called freedom and indifference. Every day, she travels back and forth across this bridge like a tireless ant. Yet suffering has not made Amy bitter. She remains bright and positive, working hard for her family, never feeling inferior or resentful about being born in a prison, because she knows that is her only home. Her new employer, Mrs. Clenum, lives in a house that appears extremely old. Living alone, she has hired only an elderly maid and a crooked-necked steward who has accompanied her for 20 years. The steward tells Amy that Mrs. Clenum has an eccentric personality and is extremely difficult to get along with. This elderly woman, paralyzed for many years, inexplicably greets Amy with harsh and cutting insults the moment she sees her. Amy simply listens quietly, with no resentment in her eyes, only compassion. In order to win Mrs. Clenum's favor, Amy presents a handkerchief she embroidered herself. After seeing the delicate craftsmanship, Mrs. Clenum decides to give her a trial opportunity. After Amy leaves, the conversation between the steward and Mrs. Clenum reveals that they know a great deal about Amy's family.
God has brought this child to my door. I cannot avert my eyes.
That afternoon, a strange man appears downstairs at Mrs. Clenum's house. When the steward sees the young man, he is visibly shocked. It turns out that this man is Arthur, Mrs. Clenum's only son. However, 20 years ago, he went to China with his father to do business and has never returned since. When Mrs. Clenum sees her son after so many years, her expression remains cold, and she even seems to resent his closeness. Arthur tells his mother about his father's death and hands her a pocket watch that his father gave him before he died. Upon learning of her husband's passing, Mrs. Clenum shows not a trace of sorrow, but when she sees the note she can never forget, her hands begin to tremble, and a look of panic spreads across her face. From a young age, Arthur has always carried one question in his heart: why his mother has always hated him. No matter how obedient he was, he would still be met with her harsh scolding. Longing for family affection, he desperately wants an answer, especially about the note left by his father, which seems to hide many unknown secrets. Early the next morning, when he gathers himself and goes to greet his mother, Mrs. Clenum remains as cold and distant as ever. Before Arthur can even finish speaking, she impatiently tries to drive him away. Just as Arthur steps outside the door, he unexpectedly notices that his usually cold-hearted mother is showing unusual warmth toward a piece of embroidery. He knows his mother very well. She never trusts anyone, and she never shows kindness to anyone around her. Because of her strange reaction to Amy, Arthur begins to question her identity. After Amy finishes her work, he decides to learn about his mother and get closer to her through Amy. When Arthur sees Amy walk into the Marshalsea prison, he becomes even more confused. This girl appears completely ordinary. At that moment, the prison supervisor happens to pass by him.
Could you tell me what place is this?
This place? This is the Marshalsea.
Standing not far away, the supervisor's son John keeps staring at Arthur. He grew up with Amy as childhood companions and has secretly loved her for many years. With the supervisor's introduction, Arthur gains the opportunity to visit Amy's father. Inside the Marshalsea prison, the families of prisoners are allowed to leave at set times to work, but the prisoners themselves cannot step out of their rooms at all. When Amy sees her employer's son appear, she is very surprised. She wants to offer him some dessert, but realizes that their only treat is the one she just brought back from Mrs. Clenum's house. Despite the awkwardness, she still hands it to him. When the prison bell rings for rest time, it signals the end of visiting hours. Just as Arthur is about to leave, Amy's sister Fanny returns to pick up the clothes Amy washed for her, and their brother Tip comes back with her. Fanny is vain and materialistic, determined to escape this mire. she has become a dancer by trading on her looks, and she does not usually live here. As for Tip, he is ignorant and useless, living like a parasite off his sisters. Out of politeness, Amy walks Arthur out into the courtyard. Because the supervisor has been waiting too long, he angrily locks the prison gate and returns to his office without looking back. Just as Arthur does not know what to do, Tip approaches him and explains that because he owes gambling debts, he has also been detained today, and he offers to help Arthur find a bed to get through the night. From the window, Amy watches Arthur, who has not left, and she cannot understand why this strange and troublesome man cares so much about their family. After being trapped overnight while visiting Amy's family, Arthur runs into Amy on his way home the next morning, and he eagerly tries to learn everything about his mother from her. As they are talking, a heavy downpour suddenly arrives, forcing them to take shelter in a cafe. For Amy, who worries about making a living every day, even having a cup of coffee is a luxury. Everything in the cafe feels new and fascinating to her. Before she can take her first sip, a girl outside the window urgently calls out to Amy, his mother. It turns out this girl is Plornish, a homeless girl Amy met in the prison, and since Amy was 10 years old, she has quietly taken care of her, and it is because of Amy's help that she managed to survive. Plornish may look like an adult, but her intelligence remains at the level of a young child, and because Amy has always cared for her, she depends on Amy deeply. Watching Amy gently care for a disabled girl, Arthur sees how life has worn her down, yet she can still smile and do good deeds, and he feels even more drawn to her. Arthur suddenly recalls his father's dying wish for him to help those in debtors' prisons, and when he connects it with his mother's fearful reaction upon seeing the pocket watch, he becomes convinced that there must be a hidden secret behind it all. Thinking about how Amy's brother helped him the previous night, Arthur quietly goes to the market and finds Tip's creditor, paying off all his gambling debts. By coincidence, on this street, Arthur encounters an old friend of his father, and he tries to learn about his parents' past from the elderly man, but the man insists that he knows nothing. However, through the man's recommendation, Arthur finds a well-known local private detective, hoping to get answers as soon as possible, especially why his mother has always treated him with such coldness, and also to investigate the reason behind Amy's father's bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Arthur's mother, Mrs. Clenum, orders the steward to burn the documents inside a wooden box, but the greedy steward secretly keeps the most important one, and hands the box over to his drunken brother for safekeeping. Unexpectedly, the steward's brother runs into a recently released and extremely dangerous criminal named Reunited in a tavern. In order to gather startup money to return to society, he keeps a close eye on the wooden box in the steward's brother's hands.
Sit down. Stranger than you think.
After seeing the documents inside the box, this murderer named Reunited immediately heads to Mrs. Clenum's house. Under the pretense of discussing business, Reunited successfully gains an audience with Mrs. Clenum.
Do not. What is it, dear madame, that you wish never to forget? A lost love.
That is my concern, sir, not yours.
After observing her emotional reaction, Reunited seems to confirm the authenticity of the documents, and a grand scheme begins to take shape in his mind. Arthur has been back home for 3 days, yet his mother still refuses to see him. Worried that his mother might think he has returned to seize her property, Arthur voluntarily signs a document renouncing his inheritance, and he also moves out of that cold and lifeless house, renting an apartment not far away. When Amy learns from her father that an anonymous benefactor has paid off her brother Tip's gambling debts, she immediately thinks of Arthur. She gathers the courage to confirm in person whether it was Arthur who helped Tip. After making many inquiries, Amy successfully finds Arthur's new address, and she visits him with Plornish.
I wanted to tell you. My brother is free.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
A gentleman paid his debts, but he would not allow us to know his name.
Really?
So, I am not able to thank him with all my heart. But if I could meet him, and take his hand and kiss it, and thank heaven that he took pity on us.
I'm sure he was very happy to do you both that small service.
Not a small service, sir. A great service.
From Arthur's evasive tone, Amy confirms that the upright man before her is indeed the one who helped Tip. That night, when John learns that the woman he loves has gone to see his rival, he cannot help but feel overwhelmed with jealousy. In order to maintain his privileges in the prison, Dorrit also intends to match his daughter with John, but Amy feels her heart gradually being filled by Arthur, yet the vast gap in their social status forces her to suppress such thoughts whenever they arise. Fearing that delay might cost him his chance, John decides to gather his courage and confess his feelings to Amy for the first time.
I took the liberty of walking this way because Mr. Dorrit chanced to mention you might be here.
Did he?
We've always been good friends. You and I, haven't we, Amy?
Yes, we have. And I hope we will continue so. Nothing changed.
But things do change, Amy. That's the way of things, and the way things should be.
I think I should go back now, John.
For Amy's family, being with John would be an excellent match, as they grew up together, and his father's position has brought them many advantages. But Amy rejects him on the spot when the prison supervisor learns that his son's proposal has failed. His expression darkens instantly, and he changes his attitude, becoming stern toward Dorrit as well. Dorrit knows that his good days are coming to an end, but he cannot force his daughter to accept John for his own benefit. Seeing her father break down in tears, Amy finds herself torn. She deeply understands the pain her father has endured being confined in that room for 20 years, and she also knows how little she can do to change their situation, leaving her lost and confused. When she goes alone to the riverside to clear her mind, she runs into Arthur once again. Arthur has just heard about John's proposal when he visited the prison, and he understands how Amy feels at this moment. What he does not know is that the main reason Amy refused John is because she has met him, yet she cannot bring herself to confess such feelings. After returning home, her father and brother are furious about her meeting with Arthur. The reason is that Tip tried to borrow money from Arthur to go gambling, but Arthur refused them, and they angrily accuse him of being stingy. Seeing how her brother embodies the helplessness of a small and struggling man, Amy feels disappointed in this pitiful family, and also despair at her inability to escape it.
Are you not ashamed of yourself, Tip? Writing begging letters to a man you hardly know when you are perfectly able to earn your own bread.
No need to take that line with me, Amy.
And how dare you insult a man who is worth 10 of you? Have you any idea who got your debts paid?
No.
I love you, Tip.
Just as she is about to step out for some air, the private detective hired by Arthur sees Amy in tears and tells her a piece of astonishing good news. He says, "Give me your hand. I am someone who can read palms." He tells her that she has worked hard since childhood, constantly caring for her family, but this will not last forever. The door to Pandora's happiness is opening for her, and some hardships will be lifted in an instant, as kindness will be rewarded. For someone living in extreme material poverty, what would it look like if they suddenly became wealthy overnight? For Amy's family, who have lived in the Marshalsea prison for over 20 years, the private detective unexpectedly discovers at a law firm that a member of the Dorrit family once left them a massive inheritance. Before confirming this fact, Arthur, who hired the detective, once again visits Amy's father in the Marshalsea debtor's prison, remembering his own father's dying wish that he should help those living in such prisons if he ever had the ability.
You are heir to a great fortune.
I shall be free.
You shall be free, Father.
And, I can leave the Marshalsea.
As soon as you're ready to.
Arthur believes that there must be an unknown secret hidden behind all of this. As their interactions deepen, Amy's positive outlook on life, and her ability to remain kind while struggling in the vortex of poverty, deeply move Arthur. Overnight, everything changes completely. Dorrit, once a prisoner, is suddenly transformed into a wealthy man. Faced with the young man who changed their fate, he abandons his former humility and, clinging to his fragile pride, tries to distance himself from Arthur.
I believe I'm indebted to you in the sum of £24, 9 shillings and 8 pence.
Not at all, sir. Mr. Dorrit, what I gave in friendship.
I prefer to be on a proper business footing. You will be repaid. And you will oblige me by furnishing a receipt stating clearly that you make no further claims upon me.
Mr. Clenum makes no claims upon us. He is our friend.
Quite right, Pa. Can't be too careful with some of these fellas.
Mr. Clenum, that being so, I have much to attend to, unless you have some other urgent matter.
No urgent matter. I simply came to wish you well.
Although Arthur feels a chill at Dorrit's ingratitude, he respects his decision. A few days later, Dorrit, now dressed in fine clothes after inheriting his fortune, leaves the place that confined him for more than 20 years in grand fashion. He plans to take his 3 children away from the Marshalsea and embark on a luxurious journey across Europe. Not being skilled in managing wealth, he believes that traveling the world can make up for the freedom he lost over the past 20 years. While Amy's father, brother, and sister gladly embrace their changed fate, only Amy remains lost in a dreamlike state, overwhelmed by the sudden arrival of wealth and freedom. and her attachment to the Marshalsea prison, she suddenly faints.
Amy! Amy?
Good gracious, where's Amy?
Find your bags! Find your bags!
Take care of her.
Vexed and ashamed. Oh, why are they not driving on?
However, after leaving the prison, Dorrit does not become happy. Instead, he becomes both deeply insecure and excessively arrogant. At high society banquets, he behaves like a frightened bird, constantly worrying that others will discover he once lived in a prison for over 20 years. To conceal this fear, he becomes arrogant, vain, and unreasonable. The father who was once respected in the Marshalsea prison has, in the face of wealth, become a spiritually hollow nouveau riche and a pitiful man. His sister Fanny becomes acquainted with the son of a powerful family. Although that family has long declined and is extremely hypocritical, she feels immensely proud just for stepping into high society. Amy's brother Tip, on the other hand, indulges himself in gambling and reckless spending. Only Amy remains unchanged. Even when dressed in magnificent gowns and living in a luxurious palace in Venice, her heart still lingers in that shabby prison in London, and she still worries about those friends who cannot get enough to eat. While others talk about money, status, and marriage alliances, Amy continues to care about human suffering. This clarity makes her brother and sister feel ashamed. They believe the sense of poverty in Amy reflects poorly on their noble and respectable image. Far away in the slums of London, Arthur and Amy's old friends celebrate the transformation of her life. Although Plornish misses Amy deeply, she understands that Amy is no longer the same as before. Not long after leaving London, Dorrit encounters the dangerous man Regard at an inn. And this meeting is no coincidence. Upon learning that the former prisoner has become a wealthy man, Regard is thrilled, and he believes he can make a fortune between Mrs. Clenum and Dorrit. He lingers like a shadow around Amy, finding every excuse to get close to her family, while trying to guide Dorrit into recalling the past. During the half-month Amy travels across Europe with her family. She keeps writing letters to Arthur and his friends, sharing everything she sees and hears. The sunlight in Venice is beautiful, forming a stark contrast to the dark and damp Marshalsea prison. Even though she no longer has to work 3 jobs a day and spends her time eating and enjoying herself, Amy feels increasingly empty inside. While Dorrit appears glamorous on the surface, his unbearable past continues to torment him deeply. He fears that his more than 20 years in prison will be discovered by others, making him even more anxious. Meanwhile, Amy's brother and sister fully enjoy this new lifestyle. Fanny constantly advises Amy to forget the Marshalsea prison, forget those poor friends, and focus on dressing herself to better match her current status. What confuses Amy is that Regard continues to follow them everywhere and keeps bringing up topics about Mrs. Clenum, which makes her feel uneasy. Could it be that her father's past, the appearance of Mrs. Clenum's son Arthur, and Regard's suggestive words are somehow connected, hiding a shocking secret?
Perhaps you're both friends of the House of Clenum.
If that's what you mean.
But there is another connection, I think, between you and her.
Soon, Fanny plans to return to London with her husband to settle down. Amy's father proposes to return with them, because Fanny's father-in-law is an outstanding banker. Now that Dorrit possesses considerable wealth, he hopes to consult his in-law about how to manage and invest his assets after returning to London. Amy also wants to go back, but her father insists that she stay behind to learn proper etiquette and cultivate the manners of a lady, so that she can marry well in the future. Amy feels disappointed and heartbroken, as she misses her old friends and Arthur, whose feelings remain unspoken. Fanny's father-in-law opens a new bank in London, and newspapers are filled with stories of his remarkable success, attracting merchants who wish to deposit their money for generous returns. The private detective who helped Dorrit find the inheritance also deposits his modest savings there. He even persuades Arthur to cooperate with Fanny's father-in-law and use the operating funds of his factory for investment. Since helping Amy's family, Arthur has devoted himself entirely to his business, and his factory is now running smoothly, entering a period of growth. His business partner suggests introducing modern equipment and seeking guarantees from Fanny's father-in-law, believing that cooperation would be a safe choice. Yet Arthur remains hesitant. In an exaggerated scene, even before the bank opens each day, crowds of wealthy people gather outside, depositing all their assets in hopes of high returns. One day, when Arthur returns home to visit his mother, he happens to encounter the dangerous Regad at the door. Regad's fierce appearance and crude manner make Arthur extremely cautious. They go together to see Mrs. Clenum, and Arthur warns his mother not to be deceived. But Mrs. Clenum shows no appreciation, angrily telling Arthur that since he has moved out and given up his inheritance, her decisions have nothing to do with him. Arthur has no choice but to leave. Yet as soon as he is gone, Regad reveals a sinister expression. The steward of Mrs. Clenum knows that Regad has discovered the family's secret. Regad wants the steward to persuade Mrs. Clenum to pay him to keep silent. Otherwise he will ruin the Clenum family's reputation. Faced with Regad's outrageous demands, Mrs. Clenum insists that he has no proof, as those important documents have already been burned, and she refuses to give in. 3 days later, after being repeatedly turned away by Mrs. Clenum, news spreads throughout the streets that Regad has gone missing. The police investigation reveals that the last place Regad was seen was at Mrs. Clenum's house, and they suspect that she may have been involved in his death. Arthur becomes deeply worried about his mother's safety and secretly searches everywhere for Regad's whereabouts. Meanwhile, after returning to London, Dorrit successfully meets his in-law, and under his guidance, he frequently attends the most prestigious social gatherings in the city. Before long, he enters the bank as a VIP and deposits all of his assets there. On the same day, Arthur also goes to the bank and sees Dorrit again after a long time, but he has no chance to speak with him. Dorrit appears gentlemanly on the surface, yet inside he is extremely sensitive. When John, the son of the Marshalsea prison supervisor, comes to visit him, the past he desperately wants to forget wounds his pride. Even though he knows John is a kind young man who once helped him greatly, Dorrit feels guilty after calming down, realizing John did not come to ask for money, but simply to visit him sincerely. After John leaves, Dorrit, torn by inner conflict, cries in shame for a long time. Yet in the social events that follow, his sensitivity and fragility grow even stronger. He constantly feels that others are whispering about him, that everyone wears a hypocritical mask, looking down on him with disdain. These illusions strain his nerves, leaving him sleepless night after night, and he decides to leave London and go to Amy. Upon arriving in Italy, Amy notices that her father begins to speak incoherently, but she initially assumes it is due to the fatigue of travel and does not think much of it. Soon after, Amy accompanies her father to an important banquet, and when Dorrit sees his eldest daughter's in-laws, he suddenly speaks inappropriately.
You are welcome, madame, to my humble quarters. No, these people, they shouldn't be here now. The gate will be locked.
My dear Mr. Dorrit, what gate?
Amy, will you go and see if Chivery is on the lock tonight? I don't feel quite myself.
I'm here, Father.
No, send for Chivery. I can't be got up the stairs without Chivery!
Dorrit completely loses his sanity, blurting out all his experiences in prison to the gathered elites. Late that night, Amy stays by her father's bedside, and when Dorrit wakes, he speaks to his youngest daughter.
I want you to take my gold watch to the pawnbroker. See what you can raise on it. And my rings. And my silver buttons.
Yes, Father, if you like.
I won't let you starve, dear girl.
After saying these words, Dorrit passes away. When Amy returns to London and brings the news of her father's death to her sister Fanny, Fanny bursts into tears. Yet her sorrow is not for losing her father, but because she can no longer wear her newly bought dresses. Although Fanny remains as sharp-tongued and indifferent as ever, she still takes Amy in to stay at her house to avoid gossip. One day, Arthur goes to visit his mother, and on his way back, he spots a familiar figure at a street corner. Seeing Amy dressed in mourning clothes, Arthur learns that the pitiful Dorrit has barely enjoyed his newfound wealth before dying in a foreign land. Arthur asks Amy why she did not contact him immediately after returning to London. Amy replies that she cannot face Arthur, because they were never meant to meet. If Arthur had not helped them obtain the inheritance, perhaps her family would still be in the debtor's prison, poor but with her father still alive. Arthur understands that Amy is in deep grief and does not disturb her further. However, the crisis that follows stirs every man in London's high society. On the very night Arthur meets Amy, Fanny's father-in-law takes his own life at home. It turns out that his seemingly prosperous banking business is already riddled with problems. For years, he has promoted himself to attract funds, using new money to cover old debts. The merchants who invested in his bank go bankrupt overnight, and the immense fortune that came to Dorrit vanishes like a bubble. Arthur's factory, which had just begun to thrive, also comes to a halt due to the loss of funds. A flood of broken contracts follows, and clients demand compensation. In an instant, the Marshalsea debtors' prison becomes overcrowded, and Arthur is imprisoned there as well. John reserves the best room in the prison for Arthur, the very room where Amy's family once lived. Arthur begins to feel disoriented, as if Dorrit's presence still lingers there. At that moment, John brings Arthur's luggage into the room, and although he deeply resents his rival, he tells Arthur that for the sake of someone, he hopes Arthur will stay alive, leave the prison, and not cause that person to worry. Arthur feels confused.
Oh, I don't have any appetite.
For Amy! Because she loves you!
What?
How can you say you don't know it? Anyone with eyes could see it. These walls know it. But you're so lofty, so far above the rest of us, you don't even notice it. All the time, I was breaking my heart over her. She was breaking hers.
On his first night in the Marshalsea, Arthur reflects on the past, realizing how blind he has been, and that in every moment with Amy, she revealed her love in ways she could never speak. Since rejecting John's proposal, she has already fallen deeply in love with Arthur. In the cold of late autumn, Arthur awakens amid the chill. That night, Arthur develops a high fever, and despite John and his father bringing a doctor, nothing seems to help. The doctor frankly says he is worried Arthur may not survive the night. In his delirium, Arthur feels Amy by his side, caring for him through the night, and he believes it is only a hallucination. But by noon the next day, when Arthur wakes, he sees Amy truly standing inside the prison. It turns out that John informed Amy of Arthur's illness the night before. Arthur tells Amy that he cannot allow her to stay with a disgraced man, as it would stain her life. Amy replies that she does not see it as a stain, because this is also the path she once walked. She tells him that she loves him and wants to stay by his side. Arthur insists that he cannot ruin her future, saying she deserves a better life and someone more suitable. After being rejected, Amy tells John that she will continue to visit Arthur. Although John feels deep pain, his love for Amy leads him to respect her decision. On her way, Reunited suddenly blocks Amy's path. He hands her an envelope and tells her that she can only open it if he does not come to see her again that afternoon. Reunited then goes to Mrs. Clenum's house, determined to claim the large sum of money for his silence. And this time he no longer hides what he knows. It is revealed that when Mrs. Clenum was young, she had a strong personality, while her husband was weak, and their marriage was unhappy. Mr. Clenum fell in love with another woman and had a child with her, and that child was Amy. After learning that his lover died giving birth to Amy, Mr. Clenum made a will, leaving a vast fortune to Amy's father, then took Arthur, the adopted son he had with Mrs. Clenum, to China for business, where they stayed for 20 years, which is why Mrs. Clenum never loved Arthur. Only now does Mrs. Clenum realize that the steward never burned the box, and she has kept the truth hidden from Amy's family all along. Reunited doubles his demand from £20,000, thanking the steward for the opportunity. Before the stunned steward, the long paralyzed Mrs. Clenum suddenly stands up, claiming she needs to go out to gather the money. Confident, Reunited lowers his guard and even begins drinking with the steward in celebration. Meanwhile, Mrs. Clenum, hunched over, struggles all the way to the Marshalsea prison and successfully finds Amy. Amy, being kind and principled, has not opened the envelope, but Mrs. Clenum insists that she read it. Filled with confusion, Amy opens the envelope and finally learns the origin of the inheritance. Relieved, perhaps out of guilt or desire for peace, Mrs. Clenum kneels and asks for Amy's forgiveness. Amy hates the inheritance, yet she does not resent Mrs. Clenum. Meanwhile, Reunited looks out the window and sees Amy supporting Mrs. Clenum while holding the open envelope, and he realizes he has been deceived. But before he can escape, the old house that has stood for most of Mrs. Clenum's life collapses violently like an earthquake, burying Reunited and the steward in the rubble. At the same time, Mrs. Clenum's life comes to an end, and like the house, this strong woman finishes her broken life in selfishness, narrowness, and loneliness. Amy returns to the prison and goes to see Arthur without hesitation, and by this time, Arthur has learned the entire truth. Two people who have never known their real mothers now stand on equal ground. Amy visits Arthur every day, and eventually, moved by her sincerity, Arthur lets go of all his concerns, and they come together, just as Amy decides that even if she returns to her former life, she will stay and support Arthur. Arthur's business partner from China arrives at the prison to find him, willing to trust him once again. Combining capital and expertise to rebuild the factory, he not only helps Arthur repay his debts but also expands the factory. Kindness is ultimately rewarded, and Amy and Arthur hold a romantic wedding witnessed by their friends and family. Life is like this: when it seems trapped with no solution, a new dawn will arrive. Amy's kindness is not naive weakness, it is a choice, and it is a strength. When the world tells her to be calculating, she chooses sincerity. When the world tells her to hate those who harmed her family, she chooses love. When the world tells her that she is now wealthy and should not look back, she chooses to return to the prison to save the man who once helped her. She was born in a prison, yet she lived like an angel, and as that decaying old house collapses, it symbolizes the end of an old, corrupt, and hypocritical era.